This Choircast podcast is brought to you by Epilogue, a novel by Katie McCrite. Cassie Trowbridge, raised in poverty and isolation, faces a resurgent threat she must defeat. Without her caretakers, she now confronts a troubling future. In a blend of suspense, romance, and the supernatural, Epilogue takes you on a thrilling journey through the unknown. Available now on Amazon.
The majority of our life is lived in liminal space.
And there's this in-between space, this liminal space.
This liminality that reveals possibility.
I think we're in a liminal moment, but also in a place of transformation. We could actually change as a people.
I have great affection for the church and a troubled relationship with it.
That can't be the gospel because God said to love our neighbors.
Just to be alive in time means that we're on the threshold of the future.
Just to begin questioning is so difficult because you have these voices in your ears telling you that you're not a real Christian.
We don't know what the future looks like. We have to work it out together.
Welcome to the Liminal Living podcast, where we have conversations with those who are going through dark nights or deconstruction. All right, Kevin Sweeney, welcome back to the Liminal Living podcast. Good to have you back on my screen today.
Yeah, Tom, it's good to be back. We were having some small talk before we started recording, and I was shorter than normal because there was a couple of things I wanted to say, but I wanted to wait for the pod. Oh. So I want to start this, and I'm not gonna hijack the conversation. I just want to begin with one thing. When I first came on, about 2 years ago, you were just getting it going, but since then, consistency, great guest. Perhaps getting names you maybe didn't think was possible before. So I want to start by seeing an old friend saying, like, dude, one, the show's awesome. Two, how are you feeling after 2.5 years or so of doing it and seeing where it's gone?
Oh, man. Well, thank you. Yeah, you were episode 15, almost 2 years ago. This June would be 2 years. And I was really unsure of myself. And you, really helped me. You were one of those authors that really helped me okay, I can actually do this, I think. 2 years from that point, just about, I feel like I got a groove. I'm more confident. And I just had a lesson that I learned just yesterday. For the very first time, I had a conversation that I don't think I'm going to air. Wow. Yeah. It was a publishing company just kept sending me all of this material in the mail, and press release stuff, and I was kind of like, whoa, I'm kind of cool, I'm kind of important, I'm getting press releases in the mail, I like this. But the first couple of times I was like, I don't really want to talk to them about that. And then the third time I was like, well, I better say yes to one of these or they're going to stop sending them. And then we had the conversation and it just didn't connect. It didn't the vocabulary was different, and I would ask questions, and they couldn't bring it down to a concrete level. It was all a lot of cliche sayings, and I was just like, boy, that one, I learned a hard lesson yesterday. That's the first time. But I've been on a good groove. I've been posting weekly. I haven't missed. I got even some backed up that I still have to edit and stuff, so I'm having a lot of conversations.
I'm stoked for you. That's awesome. And you've had great guests on. I think early on you were just about to get McLaren on. I saw you got Rob later on. It's sick, dude. It's cool. Yep. And it's exciting. When I first started the Church Needs Therapy, when you're you can find a way. You can get in touch with people. You can. Yeah. I'm hey, here's an email. You didn't get it from me, or here's this, or someone else. You connect. Dude, even for my books. And reaching out to people for a podcast over the past 3 years, it's oh, I saw this, or there's a random Instagram comment and they left their email there. It's I'll just find any way to find my way to get people. So it's fun. Yeah. It's literally a scavenger. Oh, I got their agent's email and now I can reach out. Yeah. It's fun.
Yes. And I've gotten people to say yes that I thought there's no way. I had Peter Rollins on just about a year ago. And that was just a shot in the dark. It's I'm just going to try it. And I have a friend who has a podcast that literally has 7 times more the downloads than I do, and could never get a response out of Peter Rollins. And he said yes to me. And then I told my friend, and he's like, well, how did you get that? Like, how'd you get him to respond? I was like, I don't know. He just said yes. So he's here.
Can I, cool. Before we begin, can I tell a Peter Rollins story on here?
Oh, please do. I love Peter Rollins. So this is great.
So Peter Rollins, I want, it's like Peter Rollins for me is like how other people see like bands or artists. You're like, oh man, I knew him before he was, that, or before she was that.
Yep.
And I think in 2000 and maybe January of 2009, I think it was, he did one of his first, and it might have been his first like speaking tour like thing he was doing. And it wasn't even, I don't think it was a tour. I don't think it was that big. And most people weren't aware of him yet, but it was called Beyond Evangelism. So he's basically saying, most evangelism is vandalism essentially, or something like that.
Dang. He's always been good with titles like that.
Oh, man. His book, How Not to Speak of God, was just starting to circulate for some people. His first one out here. And I finished up that spring at a evangelical Foursquare Bible college, right? I don't know if you know that, but that's where I went to Bible college. It's called Life Pacific. Good experience there. I needed to keep growing, but I had a great experience there. And for my senior project, it was like, here's all the seniors. The president of the school is like, I'm going to take the class, impart wisdom before you go off on your ministry journeys. And we had like a senior project, which is basically what's your philosophy of ministry. It was just one paper for the whole class. And so for mine, I was heavy 2008, 2009, heavy NT Wright, new creation, like having my mind blown, like many of us go through that stage.
Yep,
and
been there.
My senior project was me in a very Pentecostal environment, very fundamentalist in some ways, essentially like doing N.T. Wright's theology and being like, there's no rapture. Like, come on, guys. Like, what are we doing here? So my project in front of the class and the president is me like taking apart this entire individualistic way of seeing salvation. We're going to heaven. I'm talking about new creation. So I do that whole thing. But in the end of it, I ended with a Peter Rollins parable. Right? I ended by telling one of his parables. And it's a parable. I don't know if you've heard it or like read it. But he tells a story where, a fundamentalist preacher, an evangelical preacher, and a mystic all die. I'm going to make up some details because I forget it. All die in a car crash at the same time. You ever heard this?
He told it on the show.
Yeah, okay. So, in the end, I won't tell it all then. Okay, so they all die at the same time. Okay, so they all die at the same time. I'll make a shorter version. They all go up to heaven they're like waiting in the waiting room to have a meeting with St. Peter before they go into heaven, right? Like you do, in Catholic lore. And, the mystic goes into the meeting, right? He goes into a meeting with Jesus. St. Peter brings him into the room. You have to talk to Jesus, have a conversation before you can go in. The mystic goes in, about 30 minutes goes by. He comes out. He has like a little subtle smile on his face. Him and Jesus are just walking together, and the mystic goes, you know what? I kind of thought I had it all wrong. And he just goes off into the pearly gates, right? The evangelical preacher goes in, right? Very confident, I've preached the word for 40 years. I know what I'm talking about. Goes into a meeting with Jesus, and all of a sudden, 4 hours goes by. There's like the voices start to get raised a little bit. You hear a little bit of arguing. Sounds like there's some tension. 2 hours more, 6 hours goes by. The evangelical preacher comes out just distraught, looking like a soldier in shock. Jesus has his arm around him, and he's like, I can't believe I got it so wrong. But then he goes off into heaven, right? Then the super fundamentalist preacher stands up, dusts off his, grandpa's old Bible he's read through and marked up for years and years, goes into the room. And after an hour, all of a sudden there's all this shouting in the room, right? There's all this yelling. And a few more hours goes by. There's a bang on the wall. And it's like, are they fighting in there? After another 5 hours, they come out of the room. And when they walk out together, all of a sudden Jesus says out loud, I can't believe I've had it all wrong. And then he then the guy goes off as if the fundamentalist is so committed to his way of seeing God that in the face of God, he still not will relent and allow God to reshape his view of God. So I told that so here I challenge my school's way of thinking. And then I tell that parable because I'm like, but really, who knows, right? Let's just keep going. So that's my way of ending my senior year at a Bible college, was like that in front of my classroom.
Now, I want to know how they responded. Like, how was that received?
Honestly, and it's not a shot at anybody's intellectual capacity at all, because there's smart people in that room. But I think people just hadn't read enough outside of the school's curriculum to even have other tools to like fully understand the critique and then engage with it. I'm sure when they got older, they probably could, but no one was reading like that really in my classroom for the most part. So they were kind of like, it was just like an indifferent like thud of nothingness. They're like, okay, so who's next?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And you probably did it with like charisma and confidence. And so they're like,
I'm just laughing. So I'm like, dude, like I say, the mystic's one who takes life very seriously and not seriously at all. So here I am offering this like really strong, new creation critique. Then I tell this parable of like, who cares? We're all friends. It doesn't matter,
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. Oh,
yeah. I love Peter Rollins. Great.
He told that one.
Oh my gosh, he's so funny.
I didn't have the intellect to engage where he took that parable, because now he's like, I used to tell it this way, and now I tell it this way. So he told the story and says, and now I think you should be more like the fundamentalist preacher. And he took it some philosophical direction that I couldn't understand. And I was like, this guy's blowing my brain up.
Yeah, no, he's definitely in a different place than he was when he wrote How Not to Speak of God.
Yeah, and he actually said, like, don't read my earlier work. I got a new one coming out really soon, and we'll have to talk about that one. But don't read my early stuff. So he's changing a lot.
Funny.
But he's a cool thinker. Who's someone that you've had on your podcast that you thought there's no way they're going to say yes, but then they did?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I think the first time I got Brian McLaren, I was really happy. Because the influence he had on me back in that era, like 2008, 9, 10, 11, McLaren and other folks were really big for my journey, just in a real, genuine, authentic, personal way, like people who are really changing my life.
Yeah.
So I think him, and then, developing a relationship with him and getting him to blurb a couple books and, being at an event with him in June in New York where we both were at, like, it's just cool. And Brian McLaren, for how demonized he was, 15, 20 years ago, is the most pastoral, kind, like, genuine person. Like, when we ended the pod, he's like, hey, man, look. He's like, just consider me a friend and blah, 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 right? And then when it comes time for another thing and I reach out to him, he's like, let's hop on a 30-minute call.
Oh, wow.
And he's so gracious. He's so gracious because he knows, I think he has the wisdom and not arrogance, but the wisdom and humility to be like, I know how some of these younger guys would look to me, and I know the role, but even a short call, I know how meaningful it would be for them. I think he's aware of that, and he handles it so well. Like, he calls, he's just like, hey, man, like, how can I be of service to you? Just like, hit me with it. What do you got for me? I'm here for you.
That is so
I'm
cool.
thinking about this. And so I think having McLaren on, I'd have to really think about some of the other ones. But yeah, developing a friendship with Brandon Robertson, through the podcast, great guy in New York too. So yeah, it's cool. For me, so much, honestly, the pod was about connection. I'm going to be totally honest. Being in Hawaii, being isolated, feeling disconnected from people when it comes to place, at least in the progressive Christian, like, weird niche kind of world we live in, out here, it doesn't really exist. So I think it's just the connections that were meaningful to me. So yeah.
Yeah. I saw that Brian McLaren was on your show, and I was like, no way, you got Brian McLaren. And I was like, I wonder how I could get Brian McLaren on my show. Got an email address and shot him an email when he was releasing Life After Doom, and got him on the show.
Yeah,
and he was the one right before he did video.
I think I might have thrown you a little alley-oop on that one. I think I
didn't want to say it.
That's all right. Yes. Brian's great. He don't care.
I did get the email from you. Yes, I did want to say it, but yes, I did.
Yeah, I know, and I saw that. That was cool.
Yeah, and I actually shared a meme with him on the show and made him laugh so hard. It was the greatest, because we're talking about, climate crisis and everything. And I was like, it's kind of like that meme. I don't know if you've seen it, where the dinosaurs are kind of walking the earth and they look up and they see the comet fly in, and one of them has a talk bubble that says, oh shit, there goes the economy. He just lost it. He's like, that is so good. I've never seen that. So I got to share a meme with Brian McLaren. That was one of my favorite moments. Brought to you by Kevin Sweeney.
Yeah, a little alley-oop right there.
Yeah. So we got to talk about your book, Joy of Letting Go, last time. That was a cool conversation. You were like one of the first official authors I got to like talk to on the show when I was all nervous about doing it. And you were gracious. And now you've got a new book coming out, and I'm excited to like dive into it. It's Cosmic Christ and Concrete Jesus. That's a really cool title, especially just having a conversation where they couldn't bring it down to concrete Jesus. It was all fluffy, cliched spiritual stuff going on. And I was like, oh, we just need something really concrete. So where'd you come up with this title? I really like the title.
Yeah. Well, one, Tom and I, before we did the podcast, Tom and I met because we were doing some coaching together with like clergy and kind of burnt out leaders. And so you guys know, Tom was the big dog. He was the main coach. I was like I was under him. I was his assistant, basically. So that's how this relationship started. In that little
realm, yes. In that little realm. But then in podcasting and authoring.
He's like, Kev. He's all, Kev, this is my time. Stop. He's all, submit to my authority.
Yes, that was definitely me.
You know, on a personal level, after, I have this awakening experience in 2003, that I've talked about before, and I go through school and seminary and I read a ton and go through all these evolutionary changes in my own way of seeing. Then I pastor and lead a church for almost 10 years. And when the church was getting close to ending around 2021, I was at a walk. I was just on a walk at a park across from my house near the water. And it was just funny. I just had this thought where I said, I want to write a book about Jesus. Just a thought. And because I was really like, what do I really think now? Okay, if I've never preached on the atonement. I haven't really thought that for an extremely long time. So much of what would qualify people for evangelicals, I'm sort of disagree with, or I'm indifferent to. But how did I pastor, right? I wasn't just talking and writing. I was leading. My wife and I were leading a church for a decade. What was I really saying? How did this really shape me? What do I really think now? And why does it feel so natural for me to call myself a Christian after going through the changes I've gone through, the evolutionary movements, reading all the things that would make people not a Christian, reading so many of the authors that have led other people to a place where they're like, I'm not a Christian anymore. I'm not this. I'm post this or that. And I'm like, oh, I've read those things. I know. I get how you can get there. But why is it so natural for me to say, well, I'm a Christian? And that's really just what sparked it. Like, if I could codify this, if I could make sense of how I really see Jesus and the Christ, what is that? So that's really how it began, of like, what do I really think now? Just not what am I supposed to, not where am I supposed to be, but why does this all feel so natural for me to be a follower of Jesus still, despite the fact I'm not that concerned with people's conceptual beliefs. I'm a respecter of the creeds because I love the great tradition, but I also think the creeds are limited in terms of what they actually do for what it means to be a Christian. Why am I a Christian? So that was the catalyst. Just like, I want to write about that. And it challenged me to really take all of the things that I've been living from organically and to talk about them clearly in a book. Okay. So that was the engine for it, I think. Yeah. I'll just say this. I know more ex-pastors than I do pastors now. That's a weird dynamic for me. And the reason for each pastor's leaving of the ministry is, it's going to be very unique and different for each one. Some are no longer Christians. Some are, some are Christians, but they decided to go into, the business realm and all that kind of stuff. There's lots of different reasons. So I know more, but there was one who left the pastorate and I worked with him, and he ended up calling me up a couple months out, and he's like, I need to talk. Like, I got some stuff going on. I said, well, what's going on? And he says, I don't know what to do with the Bible because I've only ever read it so that I could preach a sermon, and now I don't have any sermons to preach, so I don't know if I need to read the Bible. I don't know if I want to read the Bible. And I was just like, because now you don't have that, the structure of the job around you pushing beliefs and practices and all this stuff. So I could see how, being on the outside of the pastorate,
and then coming and like, I don't have to do any of this stuff anymore. I don't have to say that I believe this stuff anymore. So what do I believe? And I don't think a lot of pastors
or someone getting there saying, I don't even have to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not just I don't have to do this. I don't even have to believe. Like, I think a lot of the truth, and this is a lot, honestly, I get from Peter Rollins 15 years ago. And when I was reading him early on, was like him with his psychoanalytic sort of, stream that goes into his work is saying, essentially, human beings are driven more by our unconscious desires than we are by our conscious beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So your conscious beliefs is, I believe this about God. I believe this. You're supposed to care for the vulnerable. You're supposed to do this. But really what drives our decision-making process are unconscious desires within. And I think when people lose the pastoral structure of like, I'm supposed to believe this. I have to say this. We have to do this. Once that goes away, I think it naturally allows those desires to just come to the surface more for pastors. So usually if they stop pastoring and leading within 5 years, you see more of the truth of who they are. Like one's in a corporate job, just making a bunch of money. And I'm not make money. I don't really care. But like you see what's really driving them. And I think they finally have the freedom to like own it. Like I do want this. Mm-hmm. My old structure didn't allow me to. And I think for me in my own journey where like I just think it's funny and I laugh where, whether it's 15 years ago or 5 years ago, people would look at me as like an evangelical might look at me and think, whether I'm like a heretic or at least I'm liberal or whatever. But I laugh because I'm like 20 years later, I'm more committed to this path than I've ever been. And there's a lot of people who were like why whammy type of kids and on fire for Jesus and doing this or that who would have seemed ostensibly more Christian than me. And I'm like, that doesn't even really have a role in their life right now. To be honest, the way of Jesus. And I think a part of it for me, the natural part of being a Christian at this point is from my initial awakening, my faith was not based on beliefs, but it was based on embodiment and experience.
Mm-hmm.
I was not a Christian because I believed Jesus was divine. I believed physical resurrection. I believed this and that. These are conceptual beliefs, about God, or I believe God is the Trinity or whatever. No, my faith was based on a direct experience of God. So for me, as beliefs about God and Jesus and thinking about your friend in the Bible changed, as those beliefs and how I thought about those things changed for me over the years, my place in the experiential center of Christ remained unmoved. I'm like, those aren't the point. Those are pointing, those are helping organize a community. This helps organize a social movement for 2,000 years. Yes, and there's value to those things. But the experiential center of knowing the resurrected Christ and being known by the loving gaze of God, that's the center for me. So these things can all change because that's not what's grounding me. What's grounding me is God. Knowing, direct, relational, not me having my cognitive furniture arranged in the right way about God. That's not the same thing. Ken Wilber talks about the difference between spiritual experience, direct realization, and spiritual intelligence. The way you see things. These are not the same thing. So, also I think it's my awareness that what's commonly called deconstruction right now for Christians is for me simply the movement from one stage of consciousness to the next. Or one stage of faith to the next. And there will be more stages if you keep growing. And thankfully, there are all these developmental models psychologically that enable us to see that that deconstruction that feels so catastrophic is merely one evolutionary step on a spiritual path that keeps going. And this is a big one, and I get this from Ken Wilber as well. But for most religious people, beliefs are a house for your ego.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
So it's like what does a house do? It makes us feel safe. It's our home. It's what makes us feel grounded. So if your belief system is a house for your ego, if you start to deconstruct those beliefs, it feels to your ego and to your life like someone's dismantling my home and my life. That's why it feels so traumatic. Because when you're taking apart people's beliefs, people are like, you are threatening the very existence of my sense of self. That's why it feels so traumatic. But for me, this wasn't the case. Faith was not the beliefs I had about God. It was the experiential knowing of God. So dismantle that house, take apart the house, because when you remove it, I still feel safe, loved, known, and filled with grace. And that is not what's actually grounding me is the beliefs about God. It's the knowing of God. So I think when my beliefs changed and evolved over the years, and they still continue to, it doesn't feel like taking apart my home. It registers for me more like updating a map while I'm traveling on some terrain.
Oh, that's good.
Because we've learned new things. You're supposed to update the map. A map from 1890 of California is not the same as a map from 2025. It doesn't mean the 1890 one is completely inaccurate, but this one's probably more accurate because of the technology we have now. So updating the map as you explore and discover more in the terrain of Christ for me feels natural and necessary. That's why I think I'm like, yeah, I'm a Christian. In the same way you probably need me to, probably not. But for me, direct experience of God, total commitment to the way of Jesus. Come on, I'm in that. That's my whole life, you know. Yeah. So, yeah, that's where I think that's the engine of this.
Yeah, and you are dismantling the major way that most people engage with God, which would be intellectually through vocabulary, and then organizing that vocabulary in the proper order so that you can belong to the place that says, these are the things you have to say, you know, and you had the mystical experience first and then like put names on it later. Whereas most people, they don't have that order. They have, you know, they're taught, here's the things that you need to say and believe, here's the questions you're allowed to ask, and here's the answers to those questions, and nothing outside of that matters to you. It's the devil out there. Stay right here in this little world, because this is what we can control and keep you safe in. And then like reality hits or experience hits, and like I like your concept of the house, and I've used the illustration of theology as like insulation. Like it keeps you safe from the harshness of the reality of life. But then when like some kind of existential crisis or suffering or deconstruction hits, it like tears that insulation off, and you're exposed to the actual elements, and you're like, I don't like this. But it doesn't mean it wasn't real. It means that now you're experiencing what's real. And sometimes life is hard and harsh. And then you have to ask harder questions about God that you weren't allowed to ask when you had the insulation on and you were inside of the home and all of that. So yeah, I'm really interested I want to know your definition of cosmic Christ, and then we'll get into concrete Jesus. But what are you talking about when you say cosmic Christ? I read Rohr's Universal Christ, and he talks about the cosmic Christ there. That was a fantastic book. So where do you take this concept? Teach us about cosmic Christ. I'm ready.
Yeah, one thing before I say that, you know, with what we were just saying of the spiritual intelligence and spiritual experience and the insulation part, I tell a story in the book where it's like, you know, it's a story. There's a group of friends in Hawaii. They're going on a hike, and they're going to hike to a waterfall, right? So they're having a good time. And one friend there is obsessed because he has a map of the hike, and he's like overly focused on it, obsessed with it, extremely neurotic. We have to stay on the right path. He can't. They're taking in the awe and wonder of the moment, but this guy is so obsessed with the map and having it exactly the right way that he can't take in the beauty of the moment. And then, you know, he's anxious the whole time. When they finally get to the waterfall, one friend grabs the map out of his hand and runs and just jumps in the waterfall with the map, you know? And when he's in the water, the guy's like, dude, like, what the hell? Like, dude, my map. And the guy's like, you don't need the map. We're already here. And for me, that is the mystic saying, why are we arguing about the map? Why are we arguing about, you know, whether or not things are organized accurately in your mind, when the point was for us to get to the water and to enjoy? Doesn't mean the map's not important, but the map is not the point. The map is pointing them towards that which is the point, which is the water, in this case, God, grace, whatever it is. So that's the mystic's invitation for people. So, you know, at the beginning of the Cosmic Christ chapter, right, in the book, it's like, I think the second chapter after the intro, I tell this thing, and I had this thought once, and I just decided to start writing it down, where I'm like, as a Christian, over the years, there's these funny moments where I would feel uncomfortable when people would use the name Jesus. And I'm like, it's funny because how many pastors have you met who feel weird when people talk about Jesus? But I would literally like feel weird and almost like anxious, like something is not right here. And in these instances, I'm like, if people said God, Spirit, or something similar, I'd say, okay, that makes sense. But when they would say Jesus, something in me was like, I don't know about that. So for example, right, you're at some event or whatever, and someone says, Jesus, I just want to thank, like they're praying, right? And let's say it's a group of pastors, and someone's like, Jesus, I just want to say thank you for today. Or when they start a prayer like that. And I would think, okay, so Jesus gave you this day. Jesus of Nazareth, right? The historical person Jesus who lived in the ancient Near East in the 1st century is also responsible for today happening? And I was like, in Genesis 1, which of course, like I know or I believe is a poem, I'm like, do you imagine it was a 30-year-old Jesus who said, let there be light? Is that what was happening in some other place called heaven? Like, if someone is thanking God or Spirit or Creator for the day, that makes sense to me. But Jesus, I bet that's an interesting concept. Or someone's like, I just need to it's like someone's going away for a day. I just really need to get away and be with Jesus, right? Some sort of comment like that. I just want to get away today and be with Jesus. I say, that's an interesting idea. Just a little getaway with Jesus of Nazareth. Like what exactly does that mean? Are you spending time with the same translucent Jesus we see helping Ronald Reagan sign the Constitution in those hilarious memes we see pop up? Like, do you just talk to Jesus as if he's a human being in the same way you are sitting next to you? Like, and I would say, sure, I get what they're saying. I'm not an idiot. Like, someone being intentionally present to God, yes. Consciously experiencing your true self in Christ, of course. Like, awareness and awakening in spirit, absolutely. But spending time with Jesus, I would say I'm not so sure about that. And, I understand what all these moments people are attempting to speak of, but as a person who believes Jesus was fully human and fully divine, it still seems to me to be inappropriate or like misguided to say Jesus in those places. And as a follower of Jesus, there's countless occasions where using the name Jesus to describe what is happening for me seems misguided, but I still believe there's a better way to speak of this divine spaciousness that transcends and includes everything. That's where that's my jumping off point in the chapter to say, well, okay, if that isn't the case, what is it, right? And, I don't think I'm the only one who thought this, right? The Apostle Paul speaks of Jesus ascending in order to fill the entire universe, right? Or he talks about the light of the knowledge of God's glory in the face of Jesus Christ. And he even claims in Colossians 1:17, which I love, that he existed before all things and all things are held together in him, right? The biblical writers speak of that which is embedded within everything, filling the entire universe, existing before all things, holding all things together. And I love that. I'm like, the infinite embedded within the finite, and the finite always existing with the infinite. It's so beautiful and poetic. It just has to be true, right? It's like the universal presence that is born within, but always remains beyond, but always keeps everything down. Like, what this is why Richard Rohr calls the Christ, like we were talking about, another name for everything.
We're taking a quick break here mid-show to let you know of an opportunity that Choir is offering. Are you deconstructing your faith? It's tough, believe me, I know, I've done it. But what if you didn't have to do it alone? Imagine having guides like Jim Palmer, Kristen Dumais, Jennifer Knapp, Brad Jerzak, Brian Zahn, Paul Young, and more by your side to help. I know I would have loved that on my journey. Well, now you can. Head on over to choiracademy.com, link will be in the show notes, and register for their Square 2 class using the promo code LIMINAL, and you will get 10% off. This course and community are designed to help you navigate your journey with wisdom and support, all because you're a fan of the Liminal Living podcast. Ministry leaders, how do you heal from the burnout, loneliness, and the relentless weight of leadership? Kaneo Center exists for you. For 5 years, Kaneo has walked with over 500 ministry leaders through their darkest seasons, offering a rare blend of compassionate coaching, therapeutically informed practices, and Jesus-centered renewal. Kaneo is launching new 24-week cohorts now, where you'll join a small group of leaders for weekly video coaching, guided curriculum, and reflections to rebuild your resilience. The cohort all ends with a retreat in Puerto Rico. As a Kaneo coach myself, I've seen how this space transforms lives. And for Liminal Living listeners, mention Liminal in your application at thekaneocenter.com/cohort to claim $100 off your cohort experience. You've poured into others, let Kaneo pour into you. If you're in a dark night or deconstruction, you know how vital it is to ground yourself in intentional practice. That's why I'm thrilled to partner with the Monk Manual, a journaling system inspired by monastic wisdom and backed by science. The Monk Manual is a daily journal companion for reflection, purpose, and aligning your actions with your deepest values. Whether you're rebuilding after deconstruction or seeking clarity in transition, this tool turns liminality into grounded growth. And now, Liminal Living listeners can save 10% on their Monk Manual using the code LIMINAL over at monkmanual.com/liminal. And remember, the wisdom of liminal spaces lies in how we journey through them. So do it with intention. And now back to our show.
So my jumping off point is beginning in the very beginning with the Big Bang, through atoms and molecules, cells, simple organisms, to human beings, to cultural creation, the formation of communities. There has always been a hidden evolutionary force at work driving this entire sacred process, right? From the depths of, human creativity to the unfolding of culture, within the organization of social bodies like we see politically, to the expanding universe itself, behind the curtain of the cosmic drama playing out as life itself, there's something good and powerful and intentional working. Mm-hmm. It's like this, for me, is the cosmic Christ. The cosmic Christ has been unfolding in and through and as the universe from the very beginning. It's the creative drive of evolution itself. It's the organizing principle within all forms of complexity. And it's the transcendent power immanent within the unity of life itself. And after I say that in the book, I'm like, okay, this is one of those moments, like, let me say something, here's bigger picture stuff, and let me make a little more sense in relationship to Jesus, just even in the beginning. So I say this, I'm like, think about it like this. Here's some helpful ways to start to make more sense of this. I'm like, Jesus is the path that I follow, but Christ is the power that I surrender to. Jesus is the incarnation of God in one place. Christ is the incarnation of God in all of time and space. So Jesus is concrete and historical. Christ is cosmic and eternal. So, this is all hints and getting closer to it. Like, Jesus is when the flow took on form, when the substance became structure, and when the universal power became a specific person. Or as the writer Michael Dowd puts it, I love this. He says, Jesus is reality with the personality.
Well, that's a good one. Yeah.
So Christ, it's like, imagine Christ is the ground we walk on, but Jesus is the guide, his life, an actual path we follow. Christ is the terrain of everything, and Jesus is the map, helping you make sense of the shape of that which is. And Christ is the fullness of God, and Jesus is the face of God. So to me, Christ is that which holds all things together. Christ is that which is, when Rohr talks about, Christ being matter and spirit becoming one. To me, and this is the invitation of people talking about the cosmic Christ, which many people probably aren't interested in accepting this invitation. But for me, it's one of the most amazing things. That which was true about Jesus here is true about the universe everywhere. The incarnation of Jesus, what do we say? Fully human, fully divine, matter and spirit, like this heaven and earth coming together in one place. The mystic doesn't look at that and say, no, you're wrong, evangelicals, you're wrong, whoever. No, they say, yes, but also everywhere else too. Mm-hmm. Any moment, like each and every moment is filled with the incarnational fullness of God, of matter and spirit. And we say yes to what was happening in Jesus and say it's happening right now too. The fullness of matter and spirit in the same substantive way that was true in Jesus is true in the midst of our conversation right now, in our lunch with our friends, take time by the water, whatever it is. To me, anytime we are fully awake and present in the moment, you can touch the substantive fullness of the incarnation in the same way you could touch it in the flesh and blood of Jesus. So that's the mystics get away with that. They're not saying no, they're saying yes, and also everywhere else too. So the cosmic Christ is the substance of the fullness of the incarnation that is everywhere, in everything, around everything, holding everything together at all times. And I don't think Jesus is the right way to say that in those moments I was talking about. It's like you look at a sunset, you're like, I just had an experience of Jesus. I'm like, I get what you're saying, because that's how you interface with the divine, is through the name of Jesus. But I think to say God or creator or spirit or Christ as an all-inclusive term is good, but like in those moments to say Jesus, I'm like, I don't think, to me, I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. So that's my little beginning point.
I like how you kind of played that out, spelled that out. And like, there's been some discomfort in my realm as well with just how things are labeled oftentimes. And I've been talking with kind of some of these process theologians, and you're sounding a little bit like them with the
I've
cosmic
had process.
Christ.
I have a friend who's very process who says that to me. I've never read one process author, but they will say things like that to me.
So I had a conversation with Chad Ball, and he just completed his doctoral dissertation about the death of supernaturalism, about how supernatural is not the best language to describe God anymore, because that was more a medieval duality that was created, that we've just adopted in present times. And he kind of says that, with supernaturalism, it's like a Venn diagram. You got two circles, and one is God and one is the world, and they kind of, overlap a little bit. And every now and then that overlap means, God showed up in your life, but most of your life that is not there. You're waiting for God to show up. And he says that's like that supernatural perspective that is not really good enough to describe God in a modern day age. He says it's more fully overlapped, where God is existent in the next possibility of goodness and truth and beauty. And like your whole thing about the expansive nature of God and God is the force, the evolutionary force of, like, that sounds really like it would jive with a Pierre Teilhard Desjardins, I can't remember how to pronounce his name, or a Whitehead or something like that. And I'm not a process theologian because I don't know enough to say yes or no, but the thoughts make sense to me. And it sounds like you could have good conversations between some mystics, cosmic Christ stuff, and some process philosophers. Have you ever thought about how they might interact at all?
I've never read one process theologian in my life, not one. But, when you think about, when I talk about, like the engine of the universe, this, sort of evolutionary, the force, this loving force as an evolutionary drive for the unfolding of the universe, like that type of language. When Ken Wilber talks about that, he quotes Alfred Whitehead a lot, who's the big process guy.
It's like the process guy.
Yeah. And Whitehead has this term that Ken Wilber loves to use when writing about what I was just talking about, where he calls it the creative advance into novelty. The creative sort of energizing, animating force into like a growing novelty, which I would take as like a sort of unfolding universe, that we're in. Mm-hmm. And so, I think from that phrase alone through Wilber, I probably am shaped in some ways by what became process thought. But I told a friend, I'm like, I just like read mystics or this or that. I've never read a process guy. It was almost like we took different paths to get to a similar place, even though we probably think differently just because I haven't read all those people. But yeah, I think trusting the fullness of the moment is, for me, like, incarnation is not, it begins with, can I trust it in Jesus? But in the concreteness of Jesus, the concreteness of our lives, the really liberating and awe-inspiring thing is not, do I believe it in Jesus? Do I believe it here? Mm-hmm. The incarnational fullness and wonder of this moment. That the cosmic says, or in Jesus it's here, but the cosmic Christ says now it's here. It's everywhere. And that's a daring thing to trust, is that the same substantive fullness, like you think about like water as the substance, the same water of life, the same substance of water that was the fullness of the divine and human in Jesus, spirit and matter, is true everywhere at all times for those who are awake to it. That is the great invitation for me, to trust, to believe in, and to experience for myself. And I think the cosmic Christ is consistently and perpetually inviting us into that. Oh yeah, it's here. Like, I've gone through some major like vocational and career changes the past few years, and even a unexpected one where it's like, of course, I closed our church down. I go into like a liminal, live my own liminal living, in between space for a while. And then there was this big project I put together that was going to be based out in New York, and it was all coming together, like dream come true project. And then it, I don't want to say 100% fell apart, but it basically, let's just say it fell apart. That which I've been preparing for and dreaming of after an initial thing didn't work out, and it devastated me, personally, vocationally, financially in a moment. And this was within the last year, after 18 months or so of leaving a church, I thought this was the thing. And, going after that, I don't know if you know that, but I went into hospice care.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah. So actually I took a full-time role out here as a chaplain for hospice care. And that process of trusting the fullness and of being where I am, I had this year, I despite the irony of me doing podcasts right now, I took this year to be like, I'm sort of slowly walking away from public Christianity right now, of like podcasts and, trying to build a platform, just all that stuff that it is required in the publishing industry. I just said, for my own reasons, I'm starting to step away from this. And one of the questions, or like a mantra I've had during this year specifically, is like, there's no next thing. Pastoring is always a next thing. And we're building a sermon series. We're going to get to a new place. And that's great. That's a part of pastoring and leading. You're leading people on a journey. Personally, I'm going to write the next book. I'm going to do this, and it leads to this, and I'm going to throw this event or whatever. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to take a year off, and then I don't even know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'll write again. I don't know if I'll do anything like this again, to be totally honest. But I just had this mantra. I'm like, there's no next thing. That's it for me. Like, for right now, a big part of me growing and evolving in a personal way is just trusting there's no next thing. And that is me trusting in the incarnational fullness of Christ. It was really a time for me to return to my roots of being 18, being like, I had this profound experience of God, and that's everything to me. And I feel like at 40, with things falling apart the way they did, I'm like, I'm going to return to that this year. I'm not going to try to rebuild things. I'm just going to let that happen, let it die, and let the incarnational fullness of life be enough for me right now, without the next project or the next thing that gets me more attention or whatever it is. So it's the Christ who allows me to do that slowly and imperfectly. And as I stumble through that, it's because of the fullness. It's because this is enough, and that invitation.
There's something very like here and now and gritty about that concrete version of Jesus that's also cosmic. That, like, if you don't have that, then you do have like this cliched relationship interface. I like that word that you used, with God, that you don't know. Like, you'll say things that you're supposed to say, like God is good all the time. And I'm like, really? Like, even in the tsunami, like that was good? Like, well, God works in mysterious ways. And then you just start spouting off all of these like cliched sayings that you've stored up in your brain to try and explain away the moment. And I just read a quote from David Steindl-Rast, who said, you don't have to be thankful for everything, but you can, or grateful, but you can be grateful in every moment. You don't have to be grateful for everything, but you can be grateful in every moment. And I was like, that there's something very concrete about that, where you can be in the midst of tragedy and chaos, and you don't have to be thankful for it as if God is making this for you and it's for your good and God is good in this moment. And you could just say, no, this is gritty and nasty and dirty, but there's something right now I can find gratitude in, and maybe it's just that flower that's growing over there, or finding, like, it's here somewhere. It's not in this mess and chaos and tragedy, but it could be present around here somewhere. And I can be grateful for something in this moment, but I don't have to be grateful for everything. And I think those cliches, they set us up to fail for when we talk about God, because when we lose the insulation or the house is deconstructed, then you're just like, it was all a sham.
What's there?
It was all
Exactly.
false. It's like, I was just saying things because that's what I was supposed to. But if you have that concrete Jesus that has been, an experience with a cosmic Christ that then concretizes into the moment, into the now of the next possibility of goodness and truth and beauty, I think you just get something more resilient out of that than you would if you just spout off the cliches that you're supposed to say. And I don't think church does a good job of teaching us how to interface with God outside of the cliches. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's why I think Ram Dass has a quote. This is not verbatim, but he's like, faith is not what you believe. Faith is like what's left after all your beliefs have been like blown to hell.
Yes.
Whatever's left over after all those things that you think is your faith, when those things have been deconstructed, dismantled, taken apart by suffering, by unmet expectations, by growth. Whatever's left now, when the house is dismantled, this is what's real, and this is who you really are. But, with all that said,
there's no words for that. Like, there's no words for what's left over sometimes. We don't know what to do with that.
Totally. Yeah, and I think direct realization and experience is still, so much now, like, think about in Christian publishing, to me, the past 5 to 10 years, there's so much, like, embodiment, psychosomatic, movement, getting your body, and I think people are returning to the body, which is the site for experience. It's the only medium you have to experience. That's why in the book, I have a chapter on experience and embodiment. And I'm essentially saying, can you trust, like, your body as the ultimate source for inspiration? Because it's all you have. The body is the site. So I think that's the return to experience and embodiment. Is the beliefs are just a cognitive exercise. It's not direct realization in your heart and body. It's a mental thing. It's a part of it, but we've treated the part like a whole, and it's caused some problems. Yes. But I will say with the chapter, the cosmic Christ and the concrete Jesus, think about everything I've said so far. Trust and faith and grace, and it's okay, and everything is, and I believe all that. But this is why we need the concrete and liberating Jesus. Because as a person of privilege, being a straight white male in the United States of America, I could take all that and be insulated and isolated enough from the suffering of marginalized people to be like, we're good. Let's just hang out, man. Like, it doesn't matter. Politics is lame, bro. Why don't we just go surf all the time, right? And I could do that. Yeah. Like, I could go do that. Especially I'm in Hawaii. I'm disconnected from what happens on the continent where you guys are. But we have our own versions of that here, of course. But to me, this is why there's the cosmic Christ as this larger universal affirmative yes and of the universe that says everything's okay. And it is. And then there's the liberating Jesus who brings us down, plants our feet on the ground, and says, but everything's not okay. And that's also true. And that is a paradox at the heart of, the mystic and the prophet. Because I need the liberating Jesus to call me to the margins, or else I could totally become indifferent. I need a concrete and liberating Jesus who invites me to wonder, what is it like to be in solidarity with the oppressed, just like he was. I need a concrete and liberating Jesus who is not apolitical, who does not take... Like, I think a lot of Christians in privilege and power have this fascinating ability to take the radical social acts of Jesus and turn them into little nuggets of personal wisdom and piety. Jesus is like, set the prisoners free. They're like, because you're a prisoner in your heart. Set the oppressed free. We all deal with oppression from demons, like that which was social, political, radical, and economic, and led to him being persecuted as an enemy and crucified as an enemy of the state. We're like, and that means you got to be a little nicer to your brother. Okay, little buddy. That's why in the book I sort of contrast, there is this concrete and liberating Jesus that I've inherited from the Black prophetic tradition in the U.S., and there's an abstract white Jesus that most people are familiar with.
Yeah.
Right. There's an abstract white Jesus that has a tremendous amount of influence in our country. And in the book, I just say things like this Jesus tends to side with those in power, right? The Jesus we've all come to know and love at some point in our lives. This Jesus is mostly apolitical. He doesn't get involved because he's about the heart. This Jesus miraculously transforms these radical social acts into little gospel nuggets of wisdom for our individual lives as we go back to reinforce a status quo that's crushing people who are different from us, and helps comfort us while we're a part of it.
Oh,
and in the book, I'm like, have you ever heard of this white Jesus? I'm like, of course you have. He's everywhere. Like the guy who's been completely extracted from his social and political context in ancient Palestine, who's become a mascot for white Christian nationalism. Of course you've heard of him. Like, he's not really a big fan of the poor, has virtually nothing to say about oppression, is mostly concerned with eternal salvation and personal piety. We all know this guy, Yes. He's the one the one who fills the youth group stadiums or whatever it is. And
oh yeah.
Thankfully, this is not the only Jesus I have ever known, right? My good news is that there is a concrete and liberating Jesus that has been proclaimed by the Black prophetic Christian tradition in the United States that has grounded my faith, let's just say for the past about 15 years, right? This is, so you think about everything I just said in contrast with that, this is an earthy and embodied Jesus whose ministry is defined by his identification with the marginalized and his solidarity with the oppressed. So Tom, at the beginning, when I said, what do I really believe? I get that from Kelly Brown Douglas, a womanist theologian that's just 15 years ago, reading The Black Christ and What's Faith Got to Do with It. Those two major things I took from her and have stayed with me pastorally, personally, in my writing, is that at the heart of Jesus's earthly ministry is him identifying with the marginalized and him being in solidarity with the oppressed. For me, if you do not have those two at the heart of your Jesus, it's not that you're all wrong, because that's not how things work, but there are dimensions of the truth that you simply are not accessing and are not embodying in your own life. Like this is coming. When you start to see that, like when I was taking an intro to Black theology class, when I was at Fuller Theological Seminary taught by Dr. Ralph C. Watkins, my mind was being blown every single day, and I was so ready for it, and I loved it, and it changed my life. Like when you see a socially engaged Jesus who laughed at the power of empire, didn't sit down at the dinners with empire, didn't cozy up to the emperor, right? Wasn't trying to get a place at the table. He was telling stories about the people who are trying to get at the table are the fools. Like once you see it, it's so, in our culture now, it's so laughably tragic that you just have to laugh or cry or sometimes do both when you see what we've done with this. Yeah. Like, this is a Jesus who told stories about the impotency of status and wealth and who confronted an entire predatory economic system with the flip of a table. I inherited this Jesus does not allow me to just be like, oh, the cosmic Christ, grace, love, we're cool, man. Let's just hang out. No, that is true. We are okay. Liberating Jesus also says, but it's not okay. And in order to say yes to the life God has in this world, you have to have the moral courage to say no to any system, structure, individual that is getting in the way of and not providing people access to that giant yes. The liberating Jesus always calls us into that. So every chapter in the book is a connection between the cosmic Christ and the concrete Jesus. So one chapter is experience and embodiment. You experience the fullness of Christ, you embody the way of Jesus. Love and liberation. There's universal love for everybody, regardless of religious tradition. Love is completely accessible to everybody, and yet we're called to work for liberation. Like every chapter is, half of it is, this is what the Christ means for us. This is what Jesus calls us into. And that for me, like, why I think things are easy, why one of the reasons, like, it's easier for me to call myself a Christian despite my critiques and my way of seeing things is I had this discovery along the way. I said, wow, you can be fully committed to the way of Jesus regardless of your religious beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know that sounds weird for people, but life in the living reality of Christ is before belief, beyond belief, and can never be contained with beliefs. Because if you think about it, directly experiencing love, you don't have to have correct beliefs about Jesus to actually experience love from God. Working for liberation, however you do that, you don't have to agree with all of the creeds to do that. So now you are doing the full Jesus journey, no matter what you believe. And I find that to be incredibly hopeful, because I'm like, deconstruct your beliefs, you can still be loved by God and care for others. Don't know what you believe, you can still experience grace and care for others. Like sometimes I'm like, who cares? What are you talking about? Like, that was probably one of my problems as a pastor is I'm like, I don't care what you believe, but we're here together in community, trying to open our hearts to a love that seems too good and trying to work for a liberation that seems impossible, or trying to care for others in ways like you can, whether you've been a Christian since you were 5, I put air quotes because I just don't know exactly what that means when you're 5, or whether you've never said the quote unquote sinner's prayer, both people in the moment have access to love and can care for others. This is the journey. No matter beliefs, not beliefs, Christian, non-Christian, religious, non-religious, all of that for me gets blurred in the experience of God and the experiential working out for others. So that's why I'm always like, yeah, because when other people are, I don't know about this belief, I'm like, for me, it was never about that. For me to be loved and love others doesn't require any of those things. You believe the Bible inerrant. It doesn't. What does that have to do with loving your neighbor? I don't know if the Bible works like this. What does that have to do with your ability to open your heart to love? It doesn't. Like, I don't read the Bible for devotional purposes. I didn't do that as a pastor ever. I just didn't. What does that have to do with my ability to care for people? The Bible's not God. God is God. That's what this is about. Like, again, you're worried about the map when the ocean's right here, and then the work for liberation's out there. What are we talking? That's why for me, beliefs are valuable insofar as they lead to embodiment. If your beliefs don't lead to embodiment, I could care less. And they're all they are is those glib, cliche things you were talking about earlier that insulate you from the reality of yourself and the world.
Yeah.
But if my belief in God translates to my love for my neighbor, now it's valuable. That's what it is. If you have all your correct beliefs, if you have all the proper Christian beliefs and you can say the creeds, but you're not working for liberation, caring for the marginalized, trying to figure out what it means to be in solidarity with the oppressed, loving those who are quote unquote unlovable, it's like having a container of water with nothing inside. It is a body with no heart. It is a plane with no engine. It doesn't mean anything. That's not the point. The point isn't the plane. The plane takes us from one place to another. The movement is the point. Come on now.
Yeah.
So what happens? That's what happens when you preach for 10 years and then you don't get to preach for 3 years. I take these moments and just lose my mind. It's too fun.
But it's so good. It's so good. Like I had all my beliefs all properly arranged and everything, and like now the only dogma I can really think of that I can hold on to is the prayer of Mother Julian of Norwich, when she says, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, and because there's a force of love moving through the universe that holds us fast and never lets us go. I'm like, okay, yeah, that. How does that look, and how does that play out, and what other words do I want to put on that? It's like, I don't really know, but I can. That's the thing I can hold on to with.
Absolutely.
Like, I just think that really defines hope of what it means. Like, it's not all okay right now, but I do think that there's a force of love that will not let us go. And I don't know how that's going to play out. It might take a long time, but I think love plays the long game. And so, well, we got to wrap this up because we're getting close to our time. You got to get ready for stuff. I got something going on. Where do you want to send people to buy this book? I think it'd be great if they can really dive into this stuff.
Yeah, Amazon.com, obviously, BarnesandNoble.com. Those are probably the best places to get it. The Cosmic Christ and the Concrete Jesus, the Mystics, the Black Prophetic Tradition, and Why I'm Still a Christian. My website, KevinSweeneyNow.com. You can see something more about me. And then on Instagram, I'm probably the most active, at Kevin Sweeney Now. Although in my stories, you'll see my son's basketball highlights more than anything right now. Because, he's 6 years old, getting like 30 points a game. Not to brag, but he's really killing it right now. And I love it.
Pretty
so
cool.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. So yeah, like when I realized the difference between me and other writers a few years ago, where I'm like, I feel like most religious authors write what they have learned or are learning. At the growing edge of their growth, because that's where your energy is. Wherever you're growing, that's what you're thinking about, which makes sense. And I said, why does my writing for me feel different? I said, I don't write where I'm at on the growing edge of what I'm learning. I write what I've become. I've been this for 15 years. I was this. Whatever I'm describing affected every sermon I did, everything I did in my church. So I'm like, for me, it's not like, let me talk about it publicly, then try to become it. I'm like, let me become something, and then eventually I'll talk about it. That's a little bit of a reversal that I've felt, just the energy in my work. But it's, when you read this, like, this is how I really think. This isn't an idea I came up. This is this is how I hold all this together. And I think for me, it's my individual path, but it's an invitation for everybody to be like, after the beliefs, after all this, there's still this whole beautiful way of life to continue to know God and continue to follow Jesus after all the, after whatever you feel is getting in the way. So appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Well, this was great. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll definitely keep you on the rotation.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom.